Chapter 15. The Arashgar. We Keats live our lives by 3 winds. Usfawel is what we call the wind that parts autumn from winter. She shakes the last dying leaves from the trees and casts the first flakes of snow. Her name means the soul wind, and she comes from the northeast over the orc steppes, moaning relentlessly for days or even weeks. She's a warning from our ancestors, telling us when it's our last chance to gather in the autumn fruits before they're savaged by frost. Then there are the twin winds that come in spring. One is benign and the other malign. Between them they decide the bounty of the earth for that year. Evawel, the fresh wind, blows bounteous rains from the west, for she drinks deep from the vast ocean and arrives warm and wet. Thus she waters our lands in time for the grain to swell and gives us equal measures of sun and rain. The other twin wind is Calisgwyn, the grim wind. She comes from the east, sweeping off the still frozen lands of the Prectari and central steppes. She is austere, delaying the planting and foretells lean times. She's always an omen to be treated with foreboding. Jorwin Weaver, the Keatish Cycle. Thank you, Ulthwin. Elayna smiled warmly at the potter. You won't believe the wastefulness of those Durians. There's only a small crack in it. It was easy to fix, but it won't hold liquids. Just thought it would help with your beans or grain. I should pay you. I won't hear of it. The potter held up her hand forcefully. Your father helped us out enough times. May the divine bless his spirit. Have you planted yet? Aye. The winter beans are in, and will show their heads soon. Let's pray for a bountiful wind again. With Elfena's grace it will be. I'd better be on my way up to the old Farney. Have you heard about all the consternation in town? What happened? I have no idea. I was leaving as this messenger arrived, his horse all lathering. He went straight to the old fire inn and demanded that it be prepared for his lordship, whoever that is. Caused quite a stir. Golina is working all hours and might want your help again. Ulthwin collected her handcart laden with pots and jars and gave a cheery wave before continuing up the track. Alone again, Elayna realized there was not much to do. Kerne. Where was he? Nobody seemed to know. She'd heard about the beating and was worried, but Vibnia had no idea where he was, and Jorwin had vanished too. This was not how she expected Kerne to behave. I guess he has his reasons, she sighed. Surely he wasn't intimidated and fearful of coming back. She decided to take Ulthwin's advice and headed into Blackstone to help Golina. The seamstress had prospered with the arrival of the Durians and their vanity, so a few extra argenti for her to save would be useful. Ledlos, what's the fuss? She asked the horsemaster as she reached the edge of the village. The veteran was balding, and despite being in his late 40s or even 50s, he had a spring in his step and sinewy strength. The crow's feet around his eyes were pronounced, and the occasional scar from military service shone white through his tanned and weather-beaten skin. He was fixing a fence and put down his hammer to walk over. Good day, Mistress Farmer. I know. Have you ever seen the place so busy? He made an understated grin as he gestured to the people hurrying between the roundhouses and clustering at the door of the old fire inn. So, what's it about? I heard we have an important visitor. Ledlos leaned closer in a conspiratorial manner. A messenger came in this morning. Some Durian noble will be here tomorrow or the day after. More than that, I cannot tell you. If you find out, would you let me know? Of course. Who's in charge? Barthrain is meant to be in charge, which of course means Leusios is running around giving all the orders. He gave her a wink and headed back to his fence. Elayna went straight to Golina's roundhouse, which was in uproar as she was besieged by dozens of requests from Durians and the more socially ambitious Keats for repairs and adjustments. Bless the divine, the seamstress exclaimed when she saw Elayna. Another pair of hands. Delighted to help, she smiled. Galena clasped her hands in a heartfelt gesture of thanks and waved Elayna to a workbench. She and several other helpers worked late until Galena insisted they go and sleep. I bet she'll still be working come first light, Anya said. It's late. Do you want a room at the old fire inn? Elayna shook her head as she massaged the arches of her eyes. She had several stab wounds from working with her needle in the dingy candlelight. No, I'll use me father's hut. Just come by if you change your mind. And you're not put off by Murgathwin and Leusios arguing. Do you know who this visitor is? Don't know. And I don't care, Elayna yawned. Elayna! A lad's cry startled them, and Wethrin almost collided into them. What's the hurry? She asked in surprise. Sorry, Mistress Farmer. I thought you weren't here. There's something you have to see. Anya sighed. Wethrin, we're really tired. It's very late. Please, he begged. It's about Hal. Elayna's stomach lurched, and Anya, seeing the look on her face, stepped between them. Wethrin, away with you. But it's important. Wait. Elayna stayed Anya's hand, which was raised to cuff the boy away. What is it? Come, see. The moon is strong enough. You'll be glad, Wethrin promised. Curiosity dispelled her irritation, and she gestured for the lad to lead on. He took them across the market round and across the cold waters of the ford. The moon was waxing and cast a fair light that glinted on the ripples of the water. He led them neither left to the monastery nor right to the mill and tannery, but up at an angle to the rock face. They clambered over the shallow gully made by the tumbling waters of Jumping Jack as the stream made its last dash into the Ruthiol. Wethrin swept his hand to the base of the cliff. I spotted it earlier in the day, he chattered away. And I would have come to find you if I'd known you were in town. The rest of the babble washed over Elayna as her eyes drew out the image from the moonlight on the rock face. He had taken them to where a large overhang protected a sheer stone face from the rain. The moonlight was just angled right for her to see a painting of a man, a warrior resplendent in Durian armor, but with a thick Keetish beard. He bore a shield and brandished a sword at some unseen enemy. The artist had caught the unmistakable poise and stance of her father. For those able to read, his name was written clearly at his feet. Who did this? No idea, Wethrin beamed. It just appeared. It was dry, so someone must have done it last night. Elayna did not try to stop her tears. Someone honored him, she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. May they be blessed in turn. The sense of awe had silenced Wethrin, as Elayna studied it a while through bittersweet tears. No one paints like this in Blackstone, Anya said softly. Is it Durian? Elayna shook her head. I have no idea. He never had a tattoo. Anya pointed at where the sword arm rose dramatically. A number of unusual black sigils curved around the muscle, and there was a spiral tattoo on his cheek. Yet they look familiar. Elayna nodded. They look like Pyrrha's. They're Drazian. She turned to Wethrin and gave him a heartfelt smile. Thank you. He beamed. Glad I found it for you, Mistress Farmer. Anya yawned. How about we look again by daylight? Elayna nodded slowly. Part of her wondered if this was all a strange imagining, but her practical self reassured her. It would still be here in the morning. She touched it to make sure. I would like that. They bid each other a good night in the market round. Elayna felt her feet starting to drag as she got closer to her father's roundhouse. She'd not been back since the wake. She'd been dreading this moment, and the mysterious picture had stirred an odd blend of melancholy and joy. Then she knew anger. The door was ajar, and a light flickered within. She swept in, fearless of any intruder. This was Hal's domain. Meekrieg stood before her father's armor. He turned, his manner guilty yet defiant. Master Hunter, what are you doing here? Some Durian nob is visiting, and they all tell me I should act as a captain. A show of strength, I guess. And that entitles you to me father's armor? I thought to borrow it. he admitted, shoving his thumbs into his belt and planting his feet defiantly. Elayna was tired and had no patience for nonsense. "Just get out!" Instead, he swaggered towards her. "I made a mistake with you, and I'm sorry for that. You'll see that there's no better man than me." She stared at him in disbelief and felt a burning need to puncture his smug conceit. "I can think of several." "Who?" She wanted to say Kerne. She knew Miekrig had led the half-orc's beating and so wanted to put him in his place. But what she wanted even more was sleep and for him to go away. So she played the winning move immediately. "Leusios, now get out." Confusion and some consternation spread over his face and then settled into a frown. He muttered something under his breath and stalked to the door, but he stopped there. "Heard you were seeing that half-orc. Entertaining him in your hut. Out!" He scowled and opened the door, but could not resist a parting shot. "If that's true, it's disgusting. What would your father say? Out!" "I've never seen so many orcs." Jorwin's eyes went wide, and his face grew pale. In the few days of travel they had not seen a soul, but now there were bands of orcs drifting in all around from the steppes. Kerne did not want to admit that he hadn't either. They were still some way off and inspecting the bit of ice from a distance. It was a long, oval depression, open at one end with banks rising along its length to a low hill at the far end. The sweeping banks made a natural amphitheater that thronged with dozens of tribes. The Gurgur and the Shogara are the most powerful tribes and have many tribute clans, Kerne explained. This meeting concerns them both, so all of their vassals might come. The Shogara range over the lands to the north, close to the Kennari hegemony, and east to where the Pony tribes roam. The Gurgur live in the heart of the steppes and are true wilderness orcs. They have no borders with humanity and resent the trade road. We had better wait here until the summons. Jorwin did not argue. As much as the bard wanted the experience of the Orashgar, Kerne suspected he was not keen to linger. It had been brave for him to come this far. Orc parties drifted towards the bitter sands throughout the rest of the day. Several passed close enough to stare suspiciously at the two of them as they sat by their campfire. Kerne met their looks defiantly, and none came close to trouble them. "Some seem to recognize you." "Only by reputation. Orc eyes are black or brown, mine are blue. That's why they call me Brightsight. Many would test themselves against me if this place was not under truce." "You have a reputation? I'd assumed as much, but dare I ask how?" "How you always get reputation amongst the orcs. I killed someone important." Kerne thought of his broken sword. It had been with him that day and drunk deeply from orcish blood. Leusios had given it to him when he had been 8 and barely able to lift it. Most of the monks had trained with spear and staff, so in hindsight he wondered if it had been his mother's. Such a suspicion made him feel the burden of guilt all the heavier. His loss of control had cost him more than a weapon. The greatsword had been the one constant companion through all of his changes. Now it was a bundle of shards tied in a rag at the back of his cave. The axe he was carrying was of poor replacement. He had discarded his armor, too. His burning on the road and the sand spectre had ruined the leather beyond repair. The sun emerged from behind the clouds as it sank to the horizon, washing the steppes with orange and crimson light. "A fiery sky," Jorwin murmured as a distant rumble of thunder floated from the far eastern horizon. A horn sounded. Time to go. Kerne stretched and kicked out the fire. The bard stood and hefted his pack. "So, who did you kill?" Kerne strolled a few paces before quietly admitting the truth. "Kukrak, the chief of the Gurgur." "What?" Jorwin's eyes bulged. "Don't worry. There's a truce, remember?" Kerne touched the amulet under his leather jerkin, praying it would hold. No armor, no sword, a multitude of orcs. He'd never felt so exposed. The sky grew grim, and a strong wind blew up from the north and east. "Kalsquin grows in strength," Jorwin observed, tugging his cloak tighter. Kerne sniffed the wind and nodded. It carried the smell of the encamped orcs, kindling memories of when he too had lived in their hide tents and run with them as a hunter. May Elayna have mercy on us all. Jorwin gave a humorless smile. Right now, I wouldn't want to distract her from concentrating all that mercy on just us. They worked their way through the throng of the rambling orcish camp. The clans had set up their hide tents in clusters, each centered on a campfire built with the mean fuels of the steppes, wiry brushwood and peat. Their dirty orange flames dotted around the rim of the amphitheater, feeding a pall of black smoke that hung over the area. Kerne picked his way carefully, deliberately choosing a path through the Shogara-bound clans. "Where are we going?" Jorwin asked. He bent close and raised his voice to be heard over the raucous racket as rivals and fellows argued, wrestled, or caroused around them. There was a dangerous anticipation in the air. "Down to the Bitter Sands. I must represent Hothrog." "What are you going to do when you get there?" "I'm still not sure," he admitted ruefully. "Orishgar simply means a big gathering of orcs. The purpose is not clear." He listened hard to the snarling banter as they continued through the camps, and caught a word that told him everything. "Ah, Consklag." "What?" No wonder Hothrog wanted to avoid this. Orcs fight between each other all the time, yet are smart enough to avoid all-out war if they can. Tribes often resolve disputes with battles between champions. That's called a Kredsklag. "This is different, then?" asked Jorwin. "More than a dispute? It's a chieftain fight to decide who will be Horkon, High Lord or Chief. Winner takes all. Orky's mischief. We're about to witness an event that could change the steppes for a generation." An orc staggered across their path, reeling from a punch. Kerne shoved him out of the way and pointed to where 2 orcish standards had been raised at the shallow end of the amphitheater. "This way." The tribal totems of the Gorogor and the Shogara were a haphazard collection of fetishes made from skulls, bones, and pelts, hung from cross pieces lashed to tall poles planted in the ground. "By morning, only one tribe will be left." He felt his insides churn. Find out what Blackstone would face, Hothrog had told him. Jorwin's face went paler still with comprehension. "All the orcs will unite?" "The orcs don't have an equivalent word. The closest is herske, dominate. Don't expect them to submit willingly. They are willful folk. Now stay close." He told Jorwin as he shoved and kicked his way through an open space around the banners of the Goragar and Shogara. The 2 groups of orcs had gathered, each tribe to their banner. "Nature's mercy," breathed Jorwin. "They're the most battle-scarred monsters I've ever seen." Several had seen them and grunted to their fellows, the chiefs of every clan sworn to either side. Kerne explained to his friend, and then raised his voice in Orcish to be heard by both groups. "I am Kerne Brightsight of no clan. I defeated the champion of the Fraka and stole their eyes and ears." A massive orc burst from the Gorogor cluster, scattering the hardened chiefs as if they were children. Kerne tensed inside but showed no outward sign of fear. The orc was broad and burly, like a statue hacked from stone by an artist obsessed by size without a care for proportions.
"Where is Hothrog?"
the warlord bellowed in Orcish. "I said, I am as witness for the Fraka and all their tribute tribes." The massive orc snarled and strode closer. His heavy face of bone and muscle was tense. A rune cut into his forehead glistened with beads of blood. All orcs looked savage and wild to humans. Their bloodshot eyes and pointed teeth touched a primal fear. However, this one was not simply savage, but evil. His eyes were red, not brown. When he looked sideways at Jorwin, hate blazed from his gaze like twin furnaces fueled with pure malice.
"You brought a human?"
the warlord accused him. "He has protection from the truce and my axe, Verig." Evil can snarl, but it can also smile. The tooth-rimmed grin was far more intimidating.
I am glad he is here.
The Gorogor chief made a sudden move and clapped Kerne on both shoulders. He flinched inwardly. To hide his fear, he bristled to fight. Varrig laughed and stared into Kerne's blue eyes while his claws kneaded Kerne's arms, as if testing the succulence of a piece of meat.
Kerne Brightsight,
the warlord murmured, his voice low and menacing.
You have grown stronger still. It is good to see you again. Hakra still wants to kill you. You are lucky I do not.
The grin widened as he swept an arm to gather in all the orc masses.
When you killed Kukrak, you gave me this. Swear yourself to me and become my champion.
Kerne blinked, taken aback. Why? Is Akrag dead?
He kills well enough, but soon I will be Horkon. Then I can have as many champions as I want.
Kerne glanced over to the Shogara group. I think Rorag will dispute that. Varrig leaned close, still smiling. His breath had a bloody tang.
Rorag is crow meat.
He gave a harsh laugh and looked Kerne up and down again. The inspection was unsettling. Was that satisfaction in the twist of Varigg's smile? Pride, even? The monstrous warlord turned his back on them with a snort and strode back to his tribute chiefs. They all cast dark but respectful looks in Kerne's direction. Jorwin's knuckles were white on his spear. Maybe this was a bad idea, he said in a strained whisper. Who was that? Varrig Skullcrusher, chief of the Gorogor. You're fine for now. Once this is done, we leave and make as much distance while it's still night. Rorag came to them next. He was tall for an orc. If Varrig had been hacked from a block of stone, then the warlord of the Shogara was wrought from twisted steel. Supple and strong, he had a greater reach and agility than his opponent.
So, Hothrag is up to his tricks.
Yes, Rorag. The Shogara chief growled in annoyance.
You stole his eyes and ears. Perhaps I rip out your tongue.
He cast a disdainful look at Jorwin.
No. Tell him, when I'm done this night, he and his champion will come north and kneel, or I will go south and soak the Frakalands in blood.
He dismissed them both and stalked back to his chieftains. Kerne led Jorwin over to a group of orcs gathered under an assortment of smaller banners. These are the unaligned chiefs or champions who have come to witness the fight. Hothrog wanted me to come in his place because they will be under pressure to swear allegiance to the winner. I can tell him what happened, but cannot speak for the Fraka. A second horn sounded. The clouds were moving faster now, passing the sun. They caught its flaming red light, and their long shadows ebbed and flowed down the length of the depression. The two warlords stripped naked.
Weapons?
No, just bare hands. Kerne trailed off in astonishment as he caught a glimpse of a gangly orc. Hidden amongst the monstrous chiefs of the Gorogor was Charga, the outcast. What's wrong? Jorwin became instantly alert. It's the orc who steals from Elayna's crop. Charga was dressed in shaman robes hung with crude charms. He was stroking the skull of what looked like a giant snake.
A shaman?
The bard frowned. So, an outcast no longer, and the first orcish shaman for generations? Kerne grunted a confirmation. This was unexpected and unsettling. Both orcish leaders emerged from amongst their chieftains, raising their arms to acknowledge the thunderous acclamation of their followers. The throng of orcs now pressed down the slopes of the amphitheater. The Bidavice shook with their roars. Kerne watched Jorwin as the bard was caught between relishing the drama and fear of such wildness. How are you? The bard smiled nervously. Have you ever ventured from your cave when the wind is in a full gale and the sky a clash of angry clouds? The air is heavy with the power of nature at times like that, and I'm in awe of creation. and terrified by my insignificance. That is what I'm feeling right now. And you? You say it better than I could, except one thing, Kerne countered gently. We are all, in our individual way, significant. Dorwin chuckled with forced humor. Kerne, you have such faith. Nature is remorseless. Faced with the risk of death, all I do is accept that I'm just another beast's meal someday, be it wolf or carrion crow. The horn brayed a third time. There was no official, no judge, just two naked warlords ready to tear each other to pieces. Calisgwyn grew in her fury. She whipped up dirt and grit into dust devils that dashed the length of the arena, dancing higher and higher before scattering into the crimson twilight. Orcs were running to heaps of firewood on the bitter sands and shoving in torches. The wind intensified, making torch flames sputter and dart. One by one, the bonfires caught, and flames surged through the heavier branches and logs that must have been dragged from the northern forests. The beacons created a 5-point circle that lit the arena. "Can you feel it, Kerne?" Dorwin had the shout in his ear. "What is it?" His skin was prickling all over, as if spiders with pins for legs were crawling on him. "Magic! It's happening!" While Varrig and Rorig circled each other looking for an opening, Kerne searched for Charga. He was still skulking amidst the Gorgor chieftains stroking the giant snake skull. Now he was muttering, his eyes rolling, and his chin was wet with drool. The bloody light of the setting sun was cut off abruptly as inky thunderheads surged over the horizon. The combatants lunged at each other as the last piece of open sky was swallowed in an avalanche of clouds. Lightning burst in the gloom. Thunder shook sky and earth. They were no longer on the open steppes, but at the bottom of Orki's drum. The spirit of chaos struck the clouds from above with fists the size of mountains and made the ground bounce with every booming blow. Rorag used his long reach to grab Varrig and tear a gash in his shoulder. Hooking his claws in deep, the agile warlord managed to twist the burly orc off balance. He kicked him behind a knee, and Varrig staggered forwards. Rorag leapt onto him. The brawny orc pivoted, applying both weight and speed, forcing the Shogara chief to release him. Varrig made a rough grab in vain as Rorag jumped back. The fighters circled each other, heedless of the wildness of the sky above. The orc masses, their shouting overwhelmed by the terrifying majesty of the elements, fell silent under a superstitious spell. Varrig and Rorag lunged at the same time. They traded hammer blows with their fists and then locked together, twisting, gouging, and biting. Rorag roared and pulled away just before Varrig brought his greater weight to bear. Supple and fast, he snapped a kick into Varrig's midriff, killing his momentum. Then he followed through by raking his claws across ear and forehead. They broke apart, staggering slightly before dropping back into their fighting stances. Both were bloody and wild with battle lust. There was no circling now. Instead, they shifted in and out of reach, looking for the moment to strike. Neither wanted to yield ground. Both looked for the kill. The wild winds made the flames on the bonfires dive in and out, creating flashes of light and shadow. Kerne felt the tingle in the air begin to crackle as some kind of crescendo approached. Varrig lunged. Rorag sidestepped and tripped him. The Gorgor chief recovered, but was not fast enough to avoid Rorag's kick. Varrig rolled away, just as a blazing bolt of lightning struck the floor of the arena from directly above. The burst of light dazzled them both. It writhed there for more than a heartbeat, as if drilling a hole into the bit of ice itself. Then it was gone, leaving an afterglow burnt into the eyes of every observer, and a small hemisphere of molten glass protruding from the sand. Kerne blinked away the stain of light in his eyes. Rorag recovered fastest and launched a kick. Varrig was only halfway up from his roll and was knocked flat on his back. Rorag snarled and advanced. Varrig scrambled backwards. Kerne thought it unorcish. Surely the Gorgor warlord did not fear death. Rorag stalked closer with confidence, his claws twitching for the slaughter. Varrig plunged his hand into the blackened sand around the glass slump where the lightning had struck. Rorag leapt in for the kill. The Gorgor chief pulled a rippled flame of lightning, frozen in glass, from the sand.
Varrig howled as steam hissed from his burning palm. Then he plunged it dagger-like into Rorag's belly. The glass tore a deep gash and broke in the wound. Rorag yowled and staggered. The wound, while not fatal, tipped the balance. Varrig flung the broken glass aside and leapt onto Rorag, his teeth clenching his neck and tearing meat off in chunks. The Shogara chieftain landed blows and bites, but his strength was draining away through the belly wound. Varrig bit into the neck again, deeper this time. Arteries ruptured, and the warlord bellowed in triumph, raising his face to the fountain of Shogara blood. Rorag clawed feebly at the other warlord's chest, slipping down to Varigg's thighs, and then sprawling onto his back, dead. Varigg's skull-crusher raised his bloodied palms to the horde. His bellow of victory demanded their obedience. Kerne stared at the triumphant warlord in shock. Rorag had been the better fighter. Thanks to magic, for it had been that, Varrig was now Horkon, lord of all the orcs. He flicked a glance at Charga, who had wilted, just as Leusios had done after hurling that lightning bolt during the battle against the bandits. A peal of thunder made the ground shake, and with a hissing roar the clouds burst. Varrig stood, arms raised to the torrential downpour, washing away the blood and making his monstrous physique gleam in the firelight. Kerne gathered his wits. Shogara was no more. They were surrounded by Gorogor now. "We've done what we needed to," he said to Jorwin urgently, and pulled him away into the stormy night. They had much ground to cover before dawn. He glanced up, but there was no sign of the moon behind the boiling clouds. Whatever had happened here on the sacred bit of ice this night, the orc gods had been blind to it. That's the end of Chapter 15, The Orishgar. Next time, Leusios sees an opportunity for influence as Blackstone is visited by Valiados Thelianus, third son of Lord Thelianus. And as the storm breaks over Kerne and Jorwin at the Orishgar, so Elayna is caught up in Valiados' efforts to prevent confrontation with House Caesonius. We hope you enjoyed this chapter. If so, please do show your appreciation by liking or sharing. It's a great help. See you next week.